is Mark Gunn Media.
Hit it!
Welcome to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. I'm your host, Mark Gunn. The views expressed on this program are those of the host and guests and not necessarily reflective of anyone or any entity associated with this broadcast. This episode, highlights from racism and teachable moments. I want to personally thank everybody who has subscribed to the podcast, and remember, you can download it at markgunmedia.com, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Google Podcasts, envisionradio.com, or wherever you download your podcasts. I also want to thank those of you that listen from anywhere in the U.S. and around the world. Bonjour to our listeners in France. Guten Tag to those of you listening in Germany. To my friends in Ireland. Dia Huch. Apa kabar, Indonesia. Konnichiwa, Japan. To my family in Nigeria. In Leo. Hello to my neighbors to the north in Canada. Hello, Bangladesh. Hola to my friends in Brazil. G'day in Australia. And hello to those of you listening in the UK. We would love to hear from you, and you can reach out to us by going to our website at markgunmedia.com or through envisionradio.com. What we're giving you this week are highlights from a webcast that I was a part of earlier this week. We talked about systemic racism and the controversy that went on between the talks of Sharon Osbourne and Cheryl Underwood. The panelists include Pastor Terry Jones, Dr. Daniel Williams Jr., Dr. Abel Greenwell, Renee Ritkel, and Kisa Holtke. You can watch the full webcast online at envisionradio.com. Your host is Julia R. Royston.
What is your definition of racism?
You know, I think historically we think of racism as some of the films that we've seen on people who've been enslaved and that horrible violence against Black people. But I think today what we know is that racism is much more covert, much more subtle than what we traditionally have talked about in terms of racism. And we also talk about racism as a system. Mm-hmm. You know, it works the way it was designed to work, right? Mm-hmm. And that means that a lot of times people who are of color, people who are women get discriminated against, or there's bias, conscious and unconscious bias, that's targeted at them solely because of their identity.
Racism is based on economics, race, and oppression. Racism is predicated on hatred. Anyone who has political or economic power over someone based on his or her race can be considered as a racist. For example, years ago, a restaurant chain had treated African-American customers differently than they treated non-African-American customers. And they were investigated by the federal government to see what happened. So they sent some undercover government agents to investigate as African Americans and found out that, yes, indeed, they were racist. They had African American customers to pay in advance before they were able to sit down to eat.
Right.
And if non-African Americans came while they were waiting to be seated or served, they were allowed to go in the restaurant and receive services. This restaurant did not hire any African Americans in their corporation or in their management, and they were very reluctant to hire anyone who was African American in their restaurant corporation. So that is a classic example of racism.
Yeah, basically, if you go by the dictionary definition, it's to sum it up, it's prejudice plus power. Like the doctor said, if you are able to affect the outcome of someone's life based on your prejudices or your bigotry, that is the very definition of racism.
When someone says racism or racist, especially when you say racist, we automatically are thinking of ethnicity. But in other cultures, that may not even be the case. In the U.S., when you say racism, you're automatically thinking African Americans against non-African Americans.
So I would agree, but I would also say that in an international or global context, it can mean a lot of other things.
Exactly.
I was saying this program I run in South Africa, there they have 4 categories of race: Black, white, colored, and Indian. Right. And so historically, there's been discrimination against colored people, and still is today in South Africa, as there is discrimination against Indians who also are living in South Africa. So I think if anybody's read Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, where she makes this connection between, depending on the caste that you are associated with in India, she's trying to make those connections to also race,
Right.
here in the United States and globally. So to me, it's thinking about how do we treat people differently? I mean, we just had this incident in Atlanta with the shootings and,
Right.
talking about whether this is a hate crime against Asian American women and how should we be dealing with this? So this idea of hate, the hatred of people just because of who they are, an identity that they can't change, I think those are more obvious kinds of discrimination. But I would argue that while that is, we still see those, I think it's the more unconscious bias that continues to plague the U.S. and the world that we also really have to begin to address. And I think we've done that in some ways when we talk about white privilege. I mean, one of the things that Sharon Osbourne seemed to really take offense to is the fact that she was accused of being racist.
Right.
She couldn't believe that she was a racist person. And so part of what we have to do, I think, is educate young people more about what is racism. How can you perpetrate racism? And then also not to be afraid of that word, because I think a lot of times people are so afraid of being labeled a racist that they just shut down and they can't even have a conversation, an intelligent conversation about, well, okay, you might not label yourself as a racist, but you are participating in a racist system. And because you're participating in it, you are complicit with it.
Yeah, and I want to kind of go with that. It's like when you look at the people have developed these racist views over time. It's not something that just they woke up and it just happened. These are things that people have lived with, have grown up in. I think somebody was mentioned earlier about white privilege. Because people grow up having that privilege, it's not recognizable to them because it's a part of their everyday life.
Right.
And so when we have these conversations, it's going to be very important that everyone come in open and realize, something, I may have some biases that have been influenced by the media, that have been influenced by movies, television, things like
my
that.
own home or my own family or
right. Those types of things, because I had to really look at myself as an African American male and look and say, okay, where am I as far as what have I grown up with?
So I wanted to ask specifically Renee and Kisa, because they have children, small children. When we were talking about how you're raised and how you have to have those critical conversations. I have no biological children of my own, but I have taught. I'm a retired teacher for 22 years. So you have to have those very sensitive conversations. How do you ladies with younger ones approach those conversations?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we all know about the talk you have to have with your sons.
Right.
We have that with our son and daughter, and we have a younger child now, just how to move and operate as a Black person in America. There's just certain ways you have to be. There's a certain respect you have to give. There's a certain way you have to walk as not to intimidate. I mean, those conversations start early. I had two older brothers, and all of those conversations had with my brothers by my parents are things that were instilled in me that, of course, I passed down to my children. And, this is we don't want them to have to grow up in this world, but we want to see our children come home every day. So it's like there's a certain way you have to move and be, as a minority in America. And so we start the conversations early with our kids.
Thank you, Kisa. And I'm so grateful for Kisa because I'm a white woman, in case you all couldn't tell. And I have two Black children, two Black sons. And for me, I think about sometimes, especially lately, I think about Pastor Albert Tate out in Monrovia, California, if you all know who he is. And he likes to say, I'm a recovering racist. And he also talks about and he's a Black man, and he also talks about how racism was discipled into us and how it has to be discipled out. So I think about my own journey as a mom to two Black boys. And I have had to come face to face with the bias that I didn't realize was inside of me from a very young age. And so it's been, Keith and I've had two different situations and experiences as mothers, but I think for me, I remember when George Floyd was killed, I literally wept in my little boy's bed as he took a nap. because I thought, well, first of all, as a white person, I'm unequipped to handle this. And so I need people like Kisa to come alongside me. And second of all, is this really still the world we live in? Mm-hmm. How does this continue to happen? So
can I say also, I am the mother of a young Black male child who is 22 years old. And when he was 12 years old, he was actually followed by the police in our community. And as he entered his driveway, handcuffed, because he fit the description of someone who had burglarized a home nearby. I happened to be in the backyard at the time and opened the gate to see two white police officers putting handcuffs on my 12-year-old son. Mm-hmm. So as you can imagine, that was a very traumatic event that happened about 10 years ago. And I'm happy to say that my son survived. I know a lot of young people don't survive that. And having been a former reporter, I knew that I couldn't create too much of a scene because it could be detrimental to my son and to me. Mm-hmm. And so every time there is another incident, of a Black man who is murdered by police, it has an impact on me. It has an impact, more importantly, on my son. Mm-hmm. So I think from a psychological perspective, what America really hasn't come to full grips with is the impact that not just that kind of racism has, but everyday racism, right? It's the death by 1,000 cuts.
Yes, right.
And so when I see something like that happening on television, I have to say, it's like, it makes me sick. I mean, literally, I get butterflies in my stomach because I feel like, okay, here we go again. When is it going to stop? Right. And so any of you who are parents of young people, particularly a Black male child, you have got to be praying all the time that when they go out, they will come back the same way they left. Yeah. And so it's a sad commentary because, to be honest, I am not optimistic that it's going to get much better.
The system was not built for us. And the messages that are being sent, like today, I just saw something today that dealt with the Black men get killed and white men get arrested.
Right.
Like what happened in Colorado. I mean, I saw it showed there was a meme that showed all the Black men and Black women that have been killed. And then when you have someone that they weren't even armed, but then when you have a white armed person, they get taken to McDonald's. Those types of things. And the messages that sends me as a Black male is that I'm not safe. I'm not armed, but I'm not safe.
Right.
When I look at that, I'm seeing the policing system, the whole justice system. That tells me that I'm not safe even with the police officers. I'm not safe in front of a judge. I'm not safe, so I don't feel comforted by any of those pieces.
Okay, so let me ask you this, and I know I'm going to go back to Mark Gunn and especially Dr. Greenwell, because I know they've worked specifically in media. Mm-hmm. So does the media fuel this? Do you feel like that there are producers in a conference room that say, okay, we've got to make sure that everybody knows that the statistics of Black men are this and non African American people, they're done this way. Does that help fuel it, or is it raise awareness to try to decrease it? I mean, what is the mindset when we're talking about ladies leading?
Yeah. So first, I would say I think unfortunately, these are stories that actually have not been covered enough in the past. And that's one of the reasons why white people in particular now are coming forward saying, I didn't know. I didn't know that this was necessarily disproportionately happening. So I think the problem actually has been that the media have not covered this kind of disproportionality in treatment by the police in the past. I mean, it feels like, it's being covered ad nauseum now, but the problem is, the media sort of made us think, well, it's all equal. It's equal opportunity in terms of how people get stopped. And we know what changed that. To me, the cell phone has become the truth serum of what's actually out there. Oh, yeah. If you think about Walter Scott back in South Carolina, back in, I can't remember the year because there's been so many of them now. But that, if I recall, was one of the first times where somebody had, obviously we can go back to 1990 and the LA riots in terms of individuals, running from police and getting shot in the back, I remember that video as being the real truth serum that said, no, this is what Black people have been talking about all along, that Black people get shot and killed when they run from the police. And that doesn't happen to white men who run from the police.
Right.
And so now that we have the evidence, the video evidence, it seems like we're now covering this story a lot more. And I would say that's a good thing, because as sick as I am every time I see that, if that is hidden, then people won't know that this discrimination is going on. Right. And they will think everything's just fine. Right. So I think so now the issue is we need to cover more of the systemic racism that isn't as easily captured on camera, that we know happens every day.
Mark, I'm sorry, were you going to add?
Yeah, and a part of it is a lot of the minutia, the nuances of covering racism from a television mindset just isn't sexy.
Exactly. It's not visual.
No, it's not visual. And even if you can give these statistics, you can give all the video footage in the world. And I have these conversations every day on social media. The pushback has always been, well, what happened before? What did he do? You can show a video of a Walter Scott being shot in the back, running away from a police officer. And there's going to be some idiot that will still continue to question it. The problem that I have, and this is a problem that I don't mind saying because I say it every day, is the denial that this country continues to live in when it comes to dealing with racism. I'm old enough to remember the first time that people were seeing water hoses and dogs being put on people, and the shock and the outrage, and we've got to do something. And then we have fallen into this status quo where nobody wants to upset the apple cart, and that the media included to a point. And now that we're seeing it all over again, and it's like Will Smith said, racism isn't getting worse, it's getting filmed. Media no longer has a choice when it comes to covering these stories, because if they don't do it, you've got some kid on the corner who has his own website and internet, and his phone.
The phone booth. You can push that record.
Exactly.
It goes viral in seconds, and I think that is just like, oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
Oh,
and then, and then the convenience of some police officers just turning the body cameras off and like, oh, it didn't happen, but boo, JoJo across the street got it,
right?
And Ray down the way got it, and Shanika got it that other way. They've got it, and so I think you're underestimating the power of not only social media, but it's out there. We're seeing it with our own two eyes, and I realize that conspiracy theories say, oh, well, and try to spin it, but go ahead, Renee. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say too, if you look, I've been in a newsroom before in my career, and if you look at how we focus on a Black life in general, especially when a Black life is lost, I've been disheartened and disgusted the last week. There have been 7 mass shootings across the states, and we've covered 2. And I started a spreadsheet in my spare time to keep track of these 7 shootings and the information coming out. And I'm not certain yet, but I'm almost certain that the 5 we haven't covered have taken place in either Black neighborhoods, Hispanic neighborhoods, and we haven't covered them. And so that's really, that's crazy to me. And then the second thing I was going to say is, once again, the worthiness of a Black life and how we portray that in the media. If a Black man or a Black woman is killed by just a regular citizen on the street, how do we portray that in the media? I remember I had a white friend who was killed several years ago, and I love him. He was a great man. But the way they portrayed that was much different than how the media portrays the murder of a Black person.
Right. It's, this guy was a choir boy, deacon in the church, blah, 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 blah. The Black person, they go back to his juvenile record. He stole a piece of bubble gum out of the 7-Eleven when he was 3 years old. So, the way that we are covered is a whole lot different.
Right. That's right. I mean, it's a prime example. Let's look at what happened on January the 6th.
Right.
I mean, the way that was covered. I mean, you have people going in, storming, trying to take over the government. And the majority of I'd say about 99.4% of the popular group that was there was white.
Right.
The way they were portrayed was patriots.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
but then you have Black Lives Matter during the summer, and they were called thugs.
Right.
They were called, by people in leadership. So that's why it goes back to the whole thing about power. Who has the power, and who frames this? And during the summer, it was being framed as a whole bunch of thugs. Look at how wild they are. Give me the power, I will shut them down. But that wasn't being said on January the 6th.
So I want to switch gears. We're going back to the Cheryl Underwood and Sharon Osbourne situation, because that was, first off, it was on live television.
Right.
Honestly, there was really no spin to it, until afterwards and the comments that have come out. So I just want to start off at the top. So did Cheryl Underwood handle herself well? With that whole
yes.
situation?
Absolutely.
I've known
In fact,
Cheryl.
she held back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, she showed a tremendous amount of restraint,
Yes, she did.
professionalism, because she had to.
She had to.
But she just, she walked that thing the right way, and even forgiving. I mean, I know we are quick to forgive, and some people don't like that. But her faith was on display. She was like, this was a teachable moment for her. And as a woman of faith myself, I mean, you ultimately want to forgive, whether Sharon was sincere or not. I love the stance that Cheryl took.
Yeah.
I've known Cheryl personally for years, and what you saw on display that day is the woman that she actually is. So it doesn't surprise me the way that she's reacting to everything. In fact, she said in a recent interview about the whole thing that she was able to sleep. She wasn't pressed. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's her. That's our girl.
That's her.
But then, so the Sharon Osbourne outburst, what did they tell you? I mean, the sheer panic of that lady. I was just,
That was white
I
fragility all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, just like, tell me, I don't know. I mean, you didn't see through that, you didn't see any of that. You didn't, because there is a way to defend and remain friends with somebody, but you don't necessarily agree with their behavior. I mean, I love Pastor Terry, known Pastor Terry for 20 years, but who's to say we've agreed on everything?
Right.
And if I saw him, which I haven't, but if I ever saw him in the wrong, I'd be like, okay, he's not perfect. And Terry, you was out of order that day, and not be so, I mean, I agree with friendship, loyalty. I'm there all day long. But there's sometimes when it's wrong, it's just wrong, or that you agree. And, and to me, when I was watching it, it was more like Cheryl was asking, so you co-sign? So you're co-signing with your friend? And so it's and so I could just see the sheer panic on her face. So your thoughts moving forward. I mean, now they've been on hiatus. Now it could be legal connotations. What does that look like moving forward? How do we continue to have the race conversation in the media live?
When you look at Sharon Osbourne's reaction, her reaction was gauged by a lot of things. She's thinking about, okay, I'm the host of this show, my job. I'm being drugged on an issue that is really a sensitive issue right now. And if I handle it wrong, this could be the end of me. So she's dealing with a whole lot of Sharon Osbourne. I'm not trying to give her an excuse, but we've got to understand where all that type of stuff that's going on in a person's head. And the reasons why is because I've had those type of sensitive discussions. My co-owner of my business, he's white. We've been in business for over 21 years. And we have these conversations, and he gets like that. And he really gets that panicked. Like, kind of when we have those types of discussions, when I'm pointing out those things, so you're co-signing what the former president did, or what he said, what I'm saying? So I've got, as a black male, I've got to realize, okay, the response that I'm getting is where it's coming from and what it's based in. And really be able to handle that tactfully, like my soror did, like Cheryl Underwood did. She's a Zeta.
I think that with Sharon Osbourne, she responded typically as a non-African American regarding being perceived as being blame. Mm-hmm. Blame is another issue that prevent dialogue between African Americans and non-African Americans.
Correct.
Perhaps if she had not perceived to be attacked or blamed for something that Pierce Morgan said,
Right.
there may have been a different dialogue between Cheryl and Sharon. Mm-hmm. But blaming is a big wedge between African Americans and non-African Americans regarding racism. Mm-hmm. So if we can somehow do a different attack, a different approach, I'm not saying Cheryl did it wrong or right, but if the person who's receiving it feel that he or she's been blamed, the person will come very defensive, will shut down completely. And I cover that in my book. You cannot blame non-African Americans about racism or racial relation issues. They will shut down and become defensive.
But to counter that, though, if I may, you get to a point, and personally, this is where I am. In fact, my last podcast talked about this. You get to a point to where you know that whites in this country have had access to the same information that all of us have had to process over the last 400 years. They know as much as we do that there is a racial problem in this country. They know that they benefit from the ancestors of that racism. And frankly, I'm tired of coddling people. I really am. Because until they are able to actually face the fact, okay, yeah, I didn't have anything to do with it personally, but because of the way this system is set up, yes, I realize that I benefit from it, but how do I make things better? The onus is on them. This is a problem that white America created, and it's a problem that white America is going to have to solve.
I agree with you, Mark, because I feel like white people need to get some thicker skin. I mean, when it comes to this kind of issue, because
yes, they do.
Me, I'm like Mark. I am sick and tired of explaining to you why. Now, I hear what you're saying, Dr. Williams, about people shut down, and they do. One of the things that really concerned me about the exchange between Sharon Osbourne and Cheryl Underwood was I thought that Sharon Osbourne was not only defensive, but she was belligerent to Cheryl Underwood when she talked about, don't you cry.
Yeah.
Almost like you don't have the right to cry here. I thought that was totally inappropriate for her to tell a co-host how she should feel
but again,
about these circumstances. So again, she was she was showing her racism right there.
Right.
And if you could see it, you could say, okay, I'm done with this.
Her privilege. She was showing her privilege.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's clear that there's some racism going on, and the racism is coming from you, Sharon.
Right. And if there had been reality TV, they'd be fighting and the producers would pull them off each other.
They'd be rolling on the floor.
And the whole 9 yards.
Hair off.
Well, can I say something as the white person here? I feel like I'm with you, Mark, with white people. And Keith and I have talked a lot about this lately. Like, I'm on the struggle bus with a lot of white people right now in this country. And I think, first of all, shut up. Second of all, listen. Third of all, humble yourself.
You've been listening to highlights from a webcast I was a part of earlier this week called Racism and Teachable Moments. To view it in its entirety, all you need to do is go to envisionradio.com. You've been listening to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. The views expressed are those of the host and guests and not reflective of any business entity or anyone associated with this broadcast. If you have any comments or want more information on how to be a sponsor, log on to our website at markgunmedia.com or call us at 502-407-0283. That's 502-407-0283. Thank you for listening.
Mark Gun Media. No hype, no hoopla, just damn good work.